Hey guys, this is Vol as usual. I want to take the time to talk about Infinity the game. It's a war game that's been around for more than 10 years, and I've decided to take the leap and actually play. I've finally painted up my Yujing army, one of the factions playable in Infinity, and I've had obviously played through the Ice Storm starter pack missions a few times, but I've now had a couple of proper games at the 300 points level, which is the tournament standard ITS level for Infinity. And yeah, really enjoying it. So I want to take the time to review the game for you guys, sort of explain my thoughts about it, and just point out what's not so good about the game, what is good about the game. No war game is perfect, and I think in general, War Machine Hordes probably has the best overall appeal just because it has the most players and pretty balanced rule set, although it is starting to get a bit tired, which is why a few people are going over to Guild Ball. But Infinity is a very balanced game, and I just want to first of all get into the things that really make it different. Obviously, when you play, when you first start the game and learn the rules, the thing you notice straight away is that all of your individual models are very much like solos in War Machine. They've got their 180-degree line of sight, and you move them, you activate them, they move and shoot, or they double the movement to run, or they move into close combat and they attack in close combat. But every individual model contributes an order token to a big pool of orders, maximum of 10 per group, and you spend those orders on guys to activate. But you could activate an individual guy up to 10 times in some cases. And I think in past editions that really put people off the game because the strategy which comes to mind most intuitively is just looking for the most powerful individual model in your faction. Maybe the tactical armored gear guys, the big robots look like warjacks, which we call tags for short, and maybe picking one of them and just spending all the rest of your points in your list on very cheap guys who act as what are called cheerleaders, guys who contribute those order tokens I just mentioned. So you spend all of your orders on an individual guy. So if you can imagine playing War Machine Hordes, let's say you've got an army full of gun mages, but you've got one storm wall. Imagine activating that 10 times before the other guy gets to play his turn. It wouldn't be worth it. The storm wall would just wipe everything out. But the thing is, in Infinity, every time you move with a model, if you're moving into line of sight of one or more enemy models, they all get to shoot back at you and attack back at you. So it'll be a bit more like, say, a Stormwall moving into range of 10 Mage Hunter Strike Force and them all shooting back at you, and that not working out well for the Signar player. So obviously there's a reason why War Machine Hordes don't have mechanics like that, but Infinity does actually work very well because it is more about the scenery, the terrain, and when you're collecting figures, there's an investment just not just in the miniatures but in the terrain as well. So it doesn't cost that much to get up and running because you might only need 10 to 15 figures to play, but you want to invest in terrain. But I feel it makes it a bit more interesting. You're playing in a bit more of a 3D environment. You remember games for their terrain, whereas you might not remember a game of War Machine Hordes because of the terrain. The terrain might have not affected, unless of course the terrain was a problem, like playing Menoth against Crix and they've got Denegra and there's a massive river in the middle of the table, something like that, which would affect you. But Infinity, it's a bit more involving. It's a bit more like Necromunda, the G-double game from back in the day, the skirmish game, where you've got lots of levels in your buildings and a lot of interactable terrain, and it was very interesting like that. So that's one really, really interesting thing about Infinity. I think a lot of people have been put off by Infinity in the past where they've tried it and then that wasn't really for them because they first saw, oh gosh, you can spend a million orders on one guy, that guy rampages around and kills everything. But the game's gone through a few editions now, we're in third edition, and they've brought in a lot of little things which punish you for that. So let's say you do take the strategy, you invest all of your eggs in the one basket, the one powerful guy. The most expensive, most heavily armed models in this game, in the current edition, are also now the ones most susceptible to the more exotic, specialized counter-attacking weapons. So, if you've taken a very big, heavy armored guy, he will be prone to, you'll be vulnerable to, the armor-piercing sniper rifles and armor-piercing ammunition and the rocket launchers, but then also the hacking abilities. You can actually hack into weapon systems and shut people down and eject pilots from manned machines. And the other thing is that critical hits work differently than they did in previous editions. So if you move into range of a few guys and your plan is just to gun them all down and move into the range of the next couple of guys and gun them down as well, they do get to shoot back at you. And with that pure weight of numbers, as you try to rampage your way across the battlefield, eventually people are going to start, getting spikes in their rolls and doing damage back to you. And as soon as you've lost your all-important trooper who was worth a third of your points value overall for the army, then you lose in a really awkward and humiliating fashion. So that's why in the current meta, in the current game, people don't rely too much on those single individual models. They put together a bit more of a balanced list, and it's possible to win with a few different styles, which I find really appealing. So I think that's one thing that I would sort of really highlight and point towards for people who have tried Infinity and had a little bit of dabble of it or read the rules and decided not to play. Next, a general thing that I really want to stress is the fact that the difference between the older 10-year-old sculpts and the new sculpts that are coming out is just amazing. Like, the new sculpts for this game are incredible. I've been putting them together and painting them, just having a wonderful time. I have linked in the catalog to this video description just down the bottom, so have a look at that and you'll see that it's pretty hit and miss. Some of the models are older, some of them are newer, but there's actually a article on the main Infinity website at the moment. If you're watching this video way down the track, it might not be there anymore, but it's just going through the releases they put out recently. Or if you even just go to the Corvus Belli, the game that does Infinity, that creates it, if you go to their main store, you might not want to buy there unless you live in Spain, but the main store, I think, has the newer models first, so that really gives you an indication of which sculpts are more recent and give you an idea of how good they've gotten. So another thing about Infinity is that they have, for example, if you're a War Machine player, you all know all about Steamroller, but the equivalent of Steamroller is called the Infinity Tournament System. That's ITS is the acronym there that it stands for. Apparently, I haven't really played much ITS yet, but apparently it's a bit of a weaker format at the moment. They're still trying to iron out all the kinks. It's a matter of a balance between whether the game is too weighted towards just capturing scenarios and just moving guys around to interact with objectives compared with actually killing the enemy. So in the ideal wargaming experience, you want that to be a mix. You don't want to sort of just have it purely annihilating the enemy, because then certain kinds of lists, skew lists that have a certain way of killing enemy models, are going to dominate, and those games aren't going to be very interesting. Whereas you don't want it to be too much weighted towards scenario, because then it just becomes like playing checkers or something, where you're not really engaging in the really exciting carnage of a war game where you're destroying models and fighting. So a healthy balance in between is good, and I think War Machine's at a good state with that. But with War Machine, unfortunately, it's starting to get a bit stale, where they are releasing erratas, but only a little bit at a time. They're bringing out new models and units of Warcasters, but they're rehashing of existing rules and aren't really providing much of an interesting experience, and really just adding more noise, just clogging up the game, I feel. I think the best changes in War Machine Hordes would be ones that rejuvenate older models, like new tier lists which bring older warcasters back into strength, or errataing the weaker casters to bring them up to par with newer ones, or just making older character solos go epic and things like that. That would be interesting for me. Of course, I'm still playing War Machine, but really excited about Infinity at the moment. Infinity is also a game where luck and skill is proportionate. War Machine and Hordes, obviously you can play better than the other opponent, and a spike of luck will cause you to lose. With Infinity, there is a higher luck component than there is in War Machine and Hordes, so it is a bit random. Luck's so important in any strategy game, unless you really like chess, for example. The reason why luck is important in war games is that you want to show up to the battlefield and be put in a unique, unexpected situation because of randomness, and then have to adapt to that and think of new strategies and tactics based on the case, the scenario you're dealt with. With Infinity, I think they've got the sliding scale a little bit weighted too far towards the luck side of things, where you can really be playing a lot better, but a really singularly bad dice roll will just cripple you for the entire game. That can happen, although the game is really intriguing in terms of the tactics and strategy anyway, so I'm probably exaggerating that. One thing that's really cool is the fact that you don't have to show your opponent your army list at the start of the game. You give them what's called a courtesy list, which only shows the parts of the list that you have to expose, but you bring in hidden troops and have some hidden gear. A bit like one of the old variations of Warhammer Fantasy, I think, where you don't have to tell your opponent which magic items you've taken. And I find that really appealing. I like the fact that there's a bit of incomplete information, a bit like what's appealing about poker, where you have to make some guesses. There's some mind games, and there's some bluffing and feinting here and there, and there's some surprises, and I think that's really cool. I've played hundreds of games of War Machine and Hordes, and one thing that I've found is that when I see two armies deployed at the start of the game and someone's taking the first turn, in a lot of cases, I can really see in my mind what is going to happen as the game plays out. I can see which side of the battlefield is going to be stronger for which player, which threats each player needs to take out, when the feat turn's going to be used. Because of your experience, you can sort of make some guesses, and there might be a few surprises here and there, but not really if you think very hard. So that's made the experience a bit more dull for me personally. But Infinity, I suppose that might happen also as I start to gain a lot of experience with that game. But I expect it to be a bit fresher, given that, if you're playing against a very skilled opponent who's relying on the element of surprise in some cases, you're going to be guessing about, what some of the tokens represent, because you can have tokens represent guys who are in camouflage mode and they spring out of surprise to ambush you, and it could be any number of different models in that faction's inventory, in the arsenal, the catalog of guys. So I think that's really, really interesting. One thing balancing the game at the moment is that all factions have access to the same weapons, the same rifle, the same machine gun, the same sniper rifle. So it's not a matter that some factions have better straight up statistical advantages and capabilities that other factions don't. It's just the way that they combine their stats and skills and weapons. So you've got stats, you've got skills, you've got weapons, and the other three categories, and each own faction has its own flavorful combination of those three, their own way of blending them together, which is what gives each factor its own sort of unique twist. I don't think there's probably enough diversity between factions compared to other war games where you can play, I don't know, a Warcaster and War Machine of Hordes, and he might have some spells that no other caster in the game has, and you've got access to units with abilities that nobody else in the game has. Whereas in Infinity, you might have some abilities which are also seen elsewhere in other factions all the time, but there's still a distinct, vibe that you get from playing a faction, and the models certainly differentiate that from other factions too. But one thing that I'm really looking forward to is the idea that you can also sort of balance your games and your missions, customize them. If you're finding you're playing in the meta that one faction is just too strong, you might be able to just customize your scenarios and your terrain density and your layout to mitigate that, and that's a bit more of a natural, more effective way of generating game balance and a better game experience than other ways, like just trying to bring in erratas and things like that. So it's a great company, Corvus Belli, and I'm really enjoying playing this game so far. I've invested a bit of money in it already, and I'm looking forward to doing some bat reps for you guys to demonstrate how I'm going with it. So stay tuned. I hope you guys like Infinity. If you have considered collecting it, give it a go. If you already play Infinity, you might be able to post some comments, and I'll see you guys next time.